Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we'll be talking about some of the league's top passing games and which receivers are worth targeting. I mean, stacking is a major part of any form of fantasy football, and sometimes, as we go through these pecking orders, we notice the disparity in average draft position doesn't reflect what is actually happening out there on the field. So I have a very special guest today to break this topic down with me. The man is the founder of Roto Street Journal, as well as the Fantasy Fullback Dive podcast. You may know him as the Wolf of Roto Street, Nick Traicoff. Nick, what's going on, man?
Not too much, Hartitz. I'm thrilled to be on. I really appreciate you having me. It's great to always talk ball with you, so I'm glad to have this time right in August, man. Fired up for it.
I have gone on Nick's podcast several times over the years. Always a good discussion. Make sure you guys check out the Fantasy Fullback Dive. If you haven't, he has guests all over the industry. And, he gave me a chance back in the day. And now, it's good to be hosting and get his, fun thoughts here. So it'd be great, Nick, we could sit here for 2 hours and break down every single passing game. But today we're just going to focus on the ones associated with the top 10 QBs and average draft positions. So, again, main topic is on the receivers, who we want to be targeting in these passing games after inevitably you're going to land on some of these QBs in your league. So first and foremost, the Baltimore Ravens. We know there's some sort of passing touchdown regression coming from Lamar Jackson, not because he's a bad quarterback, just because it's way too hard to be that freaking good through the air for multiple seasons. We've just seen it again and again. Doesn't really matter, though, potentially in fantasy land, because it's a very condensed passing game of Mark Andrews and Marquise Hollywood Brown. Nick, how high are you on Andrews and Brown? And do you think there could be a third member that emerges as a fantasy relevant asset?
I think it's all great questions. I definitely am super high on Andrews. It's pretty hard not to be after the season he just had. I mean, absolutely insane production. And now Hayden Hurst leads, which there's tons of good studies out there about how many more routes per game. It seems kind of obsolete. Oh, Hayden Hurst, he didn't do much when you look at the stat sheet. But the amount of routes that he could end up picking up here, Mark Andrews, could just be the difference between him being yet again like a nice top three guy and him really threatening to get into that Kelsey style tier. I like the cheaper discount you can get on him as well. So, if I miss out on Kelsey and obviously Kittle, he becomes the clear-cut number 3, even above Zach Ertz now, in my opinion. I typically end up punting tight end anyways, but still, you got to love the upside that he brings. But Marquise Brown is the one I find myself landing even more frequently, specifically because of the price. The guy showed some just ridiculous separation skills all last year, one of the best big play threats, and he was playing at like 157 pounds with a screw in his foot, so clearly less than 100%. Now you might get the full speed. He's up 23 pounds in muscle, reportedly hasn't lost any of that explosiveness that made him so special. Everybody raving, Greg Roman, all of us man-to-man saying, if this guy has a great offseason, it's going to be something special. And we all look at each other and say, wow, what a physical, great offseason he had. It's all just beautiful, especially because Lamar Jackson says he wants to have more vertical passing as well. He was very successful on those throws last year. So it all, to me, seems to line up to a monster season coming for Marquise Brown when you can get him in like round 6 or so, potentially as your wide receiver 3. There's definite wide receiver 1 upside. I'd highly recommend a great article, too, that Curtis Patrick at RotoViz wrote, highlighting all the trends that he just checks off all these boxes. That's almost like a 90% chance the guy hits based on all the boxes he checked in his rookie year. So check that one out. I love him. In terms of a third, as you highlighted, it is a low volume passing attack. I don't think I'm necessarily diving after any of these other guys, but Marquise Brown at that price point is certainly the Raven I'm going to end up with the most.
I agree with you. I don't think there's a number 3 out there, between Snead, Duvernay, Miles Boykin. We might see the occasional game or two, but just probably not going to be enough volume. So here's my only concern with Hollywood. I agree with everything you said about him just being this, awesome speed demon. I mean, he had 6 weeks inside of Fantasy's top 32 wide receivers last year, 6 weeks outside the top 64. I mean, that's already fine. Like, that's a boom bust guy that we should kind of expect. And I like having those guys on my team. I like having the chance to have wide receiver 1 production. Why do we need wide receiver 3 or 4 production every week? Give me the booms, because they're going to come with some busts, sure, but we want the booms in any format. Now, the issue for me is he's starting to creep into this legit wide receiver 1 range. And I think we both agree, Mark Andrews, only Kittle averaged more yards per route run than this guy last year. Mark Andrews is the number 1 in Baltimore. And now, just looking at this ADP, man, I'm seeing you're going to have to kind of decide between Marquise and guys like Terry McLaurin, Devontae Parker, T.Y. Hilton, A.J. Green. Now, taking him ahead of, those veterans at the end of the list to have the injury concerns are fine, but just how early are you willing to take Hollywood Brown?
I think those are all great names to bring up. I would certainly rather have McLaurin. I know you've been on my show and we raved about this guy ad nauseum. I would always take McLaurin over Marquise Brown. I would probably take Brown over those last two veterans you said, but the other names, the younger guys, I do see a better alpha potential to them. Whereas you're right, he is going to be behind Mark Andrews. He's not going to be that clear-cut number one. But Roman did have a few seasons, even in these low volume. They've always consistently been towards the bottom four in passing yardage and passing attempts. And still, he'd have like Vernon Davis and Crabtree and Kwambolde. There was always like a tight end and a wide receiver who did some good things. It is pretty much concentrated to those two positions, which is why I'm still willing to definitely take that shot. If he does creep into the Terry McLaurin range, if it's them, one of those two, I got to go McLaurin. But I do still sometimes see him creeping around 6, where you could go kind of McLaurin towards the end of 5, and then you get, Marquise to round out that early 6. That to me is a beautiful, beautiful setup at your wide receiver 2 and 3 positions potentially.
Agreed, man. All the upside in the world there. Another second-year guy that we're going to talk about now that has all sorts of speedy upside, Mecole Hardman, and now moving on to this Chiefs offense. So we know Patrick Mahomes, best QB alive. I'll argue with anyone that says contrary. And he's going to put up numbers. We know Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill are going to be the main guys getting those numbers. But we saw it again and again last season. Like it wasn't consistent, but, we had the DeMarcus Robinson 2-touchdown game against Oakland, Sammy Watkins week 1, then the playoffs. And then we have Mecole Hardman just seemingly, making all sorts of goodness happen just with 2 or 3 touches per game. Going into 2020, based on the usage from last season, we shouldn't be expecting Mecole to have that big of a year. But, Nick, do you think rational coaching and talent wins out here and we see Mecole get enough usage to, be a legit fantasy factor week in and week out?
It'd be tough to say week in and week out with those names ahead of him. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, now Hilaire also coming in as a great receiving threat. But I wouldn't be shocked at all if he can really take over that Sammy Watkins style role, especially with Watkins already kind of dinged up, already missing time in camp. Shocker there. But the rate was so good. And rational coaching is a great, can we ever assume it? And usually, unfortunately, we can. If we're going to talk about the Seahawks pass catchers later, it usually isn't as obvious as it should be. But Andy Reid is a legit, this guy is a great coach. And I think, with those touches, I know I always cite your tweet out there, the playmaker rate. Nobody had a higher playmaker rate than Mecole Hardman. And you got to think Andy Reid's seeing this now, year 2, another year in the system, another year to build down that chemistry. This guy is just unfair. He's going to be drawing like the 3rd, 4th best coverage on the teams with Mahomes. To me, this is just an offense, obviously, as everybody sees, that's never going to come off the field. And I think this guy could definitely score a ton of touchdowns. And again, you're getting, rounds 11, 12. For that price, the playmaking upside, especially if something did happen to Tyreek Hill, when you bake in that type of upside, that type of ceiling, he might ascend into that exact role, I'd say, over Sammy Watkins. Then you're talking about some just ridiculous league-changing upside. So I love taking a shot on him late just because he should take that next step regardless. And then you got that kind of handcuff upside to Tyreek Hill too.
Yeah, that playmaker rate you mentioned, just I wanted to try to figure out who in the league, just consistently has the most big plays. So found a way, just to get 15-plus yard rushes, 20-plus yard receptions, and touchdowns per touch. And Mecole, of every single person that had at least 30 touches last season, was number 1. You see the speed out there, and it really is true for him, this statement, this adage that we overuse in the fantasy community, that he is, for any boom or bust wide receiver, better in best ball. Like, it does ring true with Hardman, but, don't just limit it to best ball, because I thought your point about if any of these guys go down, he's in there. Like, that's a great point, man, because there's so many wide receivers around the league that couldn't seamlessly play all their, receiving positions on offense. They're the backup X or the backup slot, backup Z, whatever it might be. The Chiefs, they rotate. They don't have a defined slot receiver because Sammy, D-Rob, Tyreek, they all move around the formation throughout every single game. So literally, if any one of them misses time, we're getting Mecole Hardman as a every down receiver inside of arguably the best offense in the league, man. All the potential in the world. I am with you on Mecole.
I love the stat, too, that you posted as well, and PFF posted the most TD catches of 40-plus yards from last year. There was only a handful of guys that had 4, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Kenny Golladay, Stefon Diggs, and Mecole Hardman. He did only 26 receptions on less than half the targets of any of those guys. So, I mean, we've seen it. We've seen that ability, and I love betting on that late when you've seen the huge playability. Now you just need the volume to match it, and it certainly could this year. So I love it all the way.
We throw around regression a lot, and that's fun. He's not going to average over 13 yards per target again, but when guys are putting up these gaudy numbers, one of the things we see the next year is they get more opportunities because they've proven to be an awesome football player. So we don't need him to average 13 plus yards per target. If his target's double and he sticks around double digits, even less, we're going to be happy. So yes, all the Mecole Hardman, especially, it's a more than reasonable chance to get him. I think in fantasy drafts, you can get him as your wide receiver 4, even wide receiver 5, if you're going early. So definitely the type of guy worth investing in. All right. Moving on to the Cowboys, another just crowded offense. We got Cooper, Gallup, now CeeDee Lamb, Blake Jarwin, Ezekiel Elliott. They all figure to vie for targets. Dak Prescott's going to be orchestrating what figures to be anyone's idea of a top 10 scoring offense. I have Dak as my QB3. That means these guys will be putting up numbers. Who have you been targeting from the Cowboys?
Any and all of them. I love all the Cowboys. It's, again, crowded, but it's going to be an all-you-can-eat buffet. How's this team going to ever stop? Yes, the pie, there's so many mouths to feed, but it is going to be beyond enormous. It already was last year, and this was in Kellen Moore's first time ever calling plays at the NFL level. And we saw that kind of relationship with Dak was just on such a great level. You bring in Mike McCarthy, who he's got his faults. We've all seen him misuse Aaron Jones, but passing games are not one of his faults. He's consistently schemed it up. Yes, you had Aaron Rodgers, but still, the guy knows how to use his 11 personnel, his 3 receiver set. So I think we're going to see all those guys in the field a ton. And he typically does still feature an alpha, dating back to Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, even Joe Horn way back before he was even with the Packers, with the Saints, was seeing 151, 156, 149, 153 targets. Anytime he played 16 games, you saw 149 or more. So, this guy does love to pepper his alphas. We saw Adams at the other end of it, 2018, the last time he was there, see 169. To me, that's still got to be Amari Cooper as long as we have health. The guy runs such a great route tree. Everything is pristine with him. He's averaged over 16 fantasy points per game since being with Dak Prescott after being almost at under 12 with Derek Carr. So we've seen that chemistry already immediate as soon as he was traded there. It's just a matter of health. Can this guy stay together for 16 games? But I think he's pretty underrated because of how crowded this pie seems. Typically, they're going to have that alpha based on McCarthy's history. I think it's Cooper. So he's definitely a guy. If the bell cows I don't love are sitting there, I don't really love that Todd Gurley Fournette tier. After that kind of drop off at Jacobs or so, I'm ready to dive into the Amari Cooper train, maybe even before Kenny Golladay or so. I don't love Gallup. He's the one to me that kind of is still getting drafted up there pretty high. I know he just is fresh off 1,000 yards, but I think him and CeeDee Lamb are about to eat each other a little bit more than people are recognizing. But again, it's such a huge aerial pie that if he falls, I'm still going to take him just because I don't think this offense ever leaves the field without points. But Cooper is the one I kind of value at cost. And then CeeDee Lamb is an upside stab right in that Hardman range. He's such a dominant threat after the catch that he could be a monster in that Randall Cobb style role. If he gets the targets that guy just departed, it's going to be a beautiful thing at that price. So I find myself going Cooper Lamb the most, I'd say.
I think everyone can pretty much agree we're going to get, top 20 production from Amari Cooper. Just everything we've seen since he's joined the Cowboys would indicate that, just gave the guy $100 million. He's not going anywhere from a top that pecking order. Now, can they enable more than one high-end fantasy relevant receiver? And I think so, man. Since 2010, we've seen an average of 4.3 teammates per season function as top 24 PPR wide receivers. In 75% of those cases, they've also come along with a top 12 QB, like Dak has been every single season of his career. So, all the offenses in the league where we should expect 2 top 24 wide receivers, like the Cowboys are right there. And, maybe CD and Gallup eat each other's targets a little too much, like you're talking about. But even then, man, it seems like wide receiver 3 for these guys is the absolute floor. And that's a pretty nice floor when we're talking about the point in drafts we can get Gallup and particularly Lamb. After the Cowboys week 8 bye last season, we had Gallup as a PPR wide receiver 8 Cooper, wide receiver 21, just, having one tough shadow matchup after another. But Randall Cobb is also in there at wide receiver 27, man. So, it's a crowded passing game, but there's also so much opportunity. Only the Falcons have more available targets from last season because both Cobb and old man Jason Witten were leaving with 83 targets each. So, man, I'm with you on the wide receivers. And Blake Jarwin, to me, after these, because all these fantasy drafts, okay, if you don't get Kittle, Kelce, or Andrews, I'm waiting, because after those first 10 or 12 guys go, you can get Jarwin and my guy Chris Herndon, shameless plug, but mostly Blake Jarwin for very cheap.
Absolutely. I see the total upside there, especially touchdown upside with Jarwin, because you mentioned the older vets leaving, departing a huge target share. And now you're filling that void with more explosive talents, theoretically, at least, in Jarwin and in CeeDee Lamb. So to me, that's just going to generate more and more scoring opportunities for an offense that already ranked first in total yardage and sixth in scoring last year. I can see them definitely finishing first again in total yards or right towards the top, and then bumping those touchdowns up even further. And Jarwin's has to be a big part of that. He's had a 3-touchdown, 150-yard game on his resume. So we've seen that ridiculous ceiling before. I love it. I think all the weapons make sense, and none of them are priced that you can't really plug a couple of them into your lineup. Chase that offense all day. I'm with you fully.
Yeah, if you talk to if someone had only watched Cowboys Giants fans over the last 2 or 3 seasons, they would probably think Jarwin was the best tight end in the game. Hilarious how he always smashes them. But all right, another team, young rising quarterback, and suddenly we're getting some weapons all over the place. So Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, Kyler's rates and kind of rating and QB rating in different situations weren't great last season, but we just saw kind of that tantalizing upside, his ability to throw the ball down the field. And he just didn't really have that true number one. And now he does. DeAndre Hopkins, I've mentioned a stat before on this podcast, but we just haven't seen all that many wide receivers traded in the offseason and then come back around and immediately be a wide receiver one. Only Brandon Marshall has done that since 2010. Now, on the other hand of things, we haven't seen many wide receivers with Hopkins' talent traded, in the middle of the offseason. So we got Hopkins, Larry Fitzgerald, and Christian Kirk. Kyler came out in the media and said he wants to give them all over 1,000 receiving yards. I think we could both agree that's probably too high of a ceiling, but I do agree with the idea that someone behind Hopkins should probably still be able to put up fantasy relevant numbers. I guess so. Question one, how are you approaching Hopkins? Is he still a top 5 fantasy receiver to you? And question two, who else in this offense, in the passing game, are you looking to attack?
Yeah, I think I still have to have Hopkins in my top 5. He's right there at 5. But I get the stat you cited. It makes total sense, the chemistry, building all that. I just think Hopkins is a different level beast. He might be my favorite receiver in the league. We've seen him get it done with TJ Yates and Brandon Whedon and Mallett, and he's still going over 1,500 yards. So you're going to Kyler Murray. I mean, he's adjusted to crap QBs, and now he has to adjust to a potential great one if he takes the step. So many, including myself, are projecting for him. And you talk about year 2 in the air raid, so many people talking about, in Kingsbury especially, how important that second year of comfort level for Kyler, but also Kingsbury as a play caller are to really have this thing get into the full gear. We never really saw it take off, that air raid in year 1, even though they jumped from dead last in points per game to 20th. It was a pretty good leap, over a touchdown more per game. I think we could see that take that next leap step forward and enter that top 10 conversation in year 2, just based on comfort level for Kyler and Kingsbury alone, never mind Hopkins being there. So, all those ships rise together. Hopkins, I still like in my top 5, right there at 5. I typically go workhorse in round 2 anyways. I love going RB. So I haven't landed Hopkins in too many, but I still see the upside. I totally love it. Behind him, I mean, Kirk, now that he's going to be drawing weaker coverage, he never was fully healthy last year. I think the guy can still ball. You move him into the slot. I think he's the one, if there was going to be 2,000-yard receivers, it's pretty clear to me Kirk would be the best option. I don't know that I fully buy it. I think I'm still going more Hopkins is an alpha and kind of dominates it and still hits that 1,300-yard range. And I think Kirk and Fitz, maybe Kirk gets to 1,000. I don't like Fitz too much at all. I don't think that's too bold to say either. But I'm not dying to get Kirk, I guess. Are you chasing the Kirk train? What do you think about him?
think I'm on the same page here as you. I wasn't down on Kirk, but I did an article a couple of weeks ago just looking at, where are my rankings versus guys in the ADP. And Kirk was like jumping out as someone that I'm lower on because I have him in the wide receiver 50 range, and he's still kind of being taken almost as that wide receiver 40 range. So I'm taking guys like, Anthony Miller, Mecole Hardman, just some guys I've seen do it at a higher level a little bit more, because I really like Kirk going to last year, but that was more of a volume play. And now with Fitz back and now Hopkins there, I just think even triple-digit targets could be tough to come by. I mean, not to mention if Drake or who knows, Dan Arnold, or some deep sleeper like that gets going on as well. Maybe Andy Isabella makes some noise. Ultimately, it's a really crowded offense. And I think one thing we have seen, in Cleveland a little bit, in some of these air raid style NFL offenses is, even Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs, like they don't force feed a single wide receiver or even like two wide receivers. They spread the ball out a lot more. Great idea for real life football. Like this is obviously working well, but for fantasy, we're just not getting the condensed passing games we're looking for. DeAndre Hopkins is also my number 5 receiver, but yeah, man, I'm taking the first, honestly, 13, 14 running backs before him in drafts. So I'm just not really getting Nick Hopkins. I mean, I think it's clear. You got your top 4, but then from Hopkins, your Gallaudays, your Godwins, your Mike Evans, your Coopers, we just have questions about these guys that we don't have the same questions for among our top 4 wide receivers. So, yeah, man, I'm pretty much with you on Arizona. We might just be still a little ahead of the curve here on this Cardinals offense. I like Kyler. I like the future of his team, but, man, like at these current rates, we're going to need them to be near their ceiling pretty much in 2020 to pay off at these ADPs.
I totally agree. I know you compared him earlier this offseason to the Browns, and I see that. Are we getting just a little too early on these guys? Are we buying the hype? Is the line going to be there to sustain it all? So there are some fair questions for sure. I can't wait to see this Kyler to Hopkins connection. And I do still like taking Kyler a lot, but if we're talking about stacks, it's not the clearest stack situation by any means.
Yeah, that's the important thing here, because I think their team looks a lot like the 2019 Browns potentially. Kyler, I don't think is going to suffer that Baker drop purely because he's got that insane rushing floor. So fantasy purposes, not so much. But yeah, I definitely think the Cardinals, we're looking at more of a 7-9, 8-8 team than someone that's going to compete for the number 1 spot in that ever tough NFC West division. All right. Another just baller, dual threat, young QB, Deshaun Watson. Now, I am just fully convinced that with or without DeAndre Hopkins, who amazing wide receiver, we just, said that. But Watson's a top 5 QB, I think, no matter who you put around him. And while life without Hopkins is objectively worse for any QB to deal with, suddenly we got a lot of talent around the guy. I mean, with David and Duke Johnson, you got 2 baller receivers in the backfield, and then just having, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, Randall Cobb, Kenny Stills. I mean, there were games over the past few seasons where, Hopkins was playing hurt, Fuller was out, and it was like we were just feeding targets to Kiki Kuti and DeAndre Carter just because there was no one else there. Now, finally, we got 4 deep wide receivers, some running backs, man, and no one's being priced all that high. Who have you been targeting from this Texans offense?
I'm going, it's a great offense to target. Like you said, the price is there for all of them. The narrative I'm buying the most is Brandon Cooks. I mean, the guy has routinely topped 1,000 yards despite turning over team after team 4 straight seasons before last year, even on all these different teams amidst all that between the Rams, the Pats, and then obviously the Saints. And now he goes to be the potential clear-cut number 1 in a very crowded core with the Rams. Now is the potential number 1 for Deshaun Watson, who slings probably, if not the best deep ball, one of the best, according to Pro Football Focus. 5th in deep yardage, 2nd in deep TDs with 11, 1st in their Pro Football Focus's adjusted deep completion percentage. So, I mean, you get a premier deep threat in Brandon Cooks, who's got it done time after time, regardless of where he's gone, with a guy like Watson who can really sling that rock. I love him moving from Jared Goff in a crowded, congested situation to this one. And I get the concussion history, but he's only missed 2-3 games actually, realistically throughout his career. Yes, if he gets another concussion, it could be devastating. But, to me, I have a lot more faith in his health than I do Will Fuller. And if Will Fuller goes down, it's even just that much clearer of a target situation. But I just love what this offense could look like. Just speed all over the place with a QB that can sling it. Let's really hope B.O.B. wakes up and it just lets him play that ball.
Yeah, it's been fun on Twitter joking with the 4 verts meme. Just that's what the Texans could be running all year. But it's true, man. And we've seen this speed just have an impact on every other quarterback they've been with. I mean, Brandon Cooks, if you just look at Tom Brady, Jared Goff, and Drew Brees, with or without Brandon Cooks, they've all averaged more yards per attempt with him. I mean, Watson's, we don't have Watson splits with or without Hopkins, but with and without Will Fuller, they're extreme. He's much better when he has field stretchers on the field. And, it's just not going to be a situation where the Texans are going to be this bad offense. There's going to be production and, all these guys being priced as wide receiver 3s or lower, like you're just getting them at their floor if they have some semblance of health. And okay, for all the pessimists out there, I say Cook's going to get concussed, Fuller's going to get hurt. That means Randall Cobb is going to eat people. I mean, he is the discount version of Jamison Crowder. I know it's not sexy, but it's free. He just got $20 million guaranteed. Like the front office is telling us he's going to get these targets. For years, we were almost talking ourselves into Kiki Kuti just because he would have these games with double-digit targets randomly. And Cobb is still just going free. I understand he had bad case of the drops last season, but, we kind of overrate drops in fantasy football to begin with. I think the money indicates the targets are going to be there. And to Cobb's credit, I mean, he's not washed or anything. The dude averaged almost 10 yards per target last season. So, man, it does not get cheaper. And in my mind, you got that high floor than Randall Cobb in Houston.
I mean, yeah, definite punt play. I love it. Like, what else are you looking at that late? If Bryan Edwards is there, I know we're talking about the Texans, but he's like the potential alpha that could emerge like as a McLaurin-style breakout. So if he's there, I'm not going to take Cobb, but I totally see the narrative, and especially in those 20-round best balls, and if people get hurt in front of them, there's definitely some upside there late to Cobb as well.
Yeah, we've hyped up Mecole Hardman before. I, in general, take the upside guys, but you're taking Cobb as like your wide receiver 7 or 8. This is not a situation where you're just going to look back on your draft and say, wow, if I hadn't picked Cobb in round 15, then, I really could have turned things around. Just take those targets. So if, week 3 comes around and we look and Cobb's like 7th in the league in targets, which is very possible, you'll be one happy owner. So, all right, man, we got 5 more teams. We're going to shorten these up a little bit. One of the things you guys do at the, Roto Street Journal that I like is you just kind of treat players and teams like the stock market. So we're going to do a quick round, buy and sell. So the Seahawks, Russell Wilson, man, he's been petitioning all offseason to cook more. He's like, let's treat every quarter like the fourth quarter because whenever they give the ball to Russ, good things happen. Now, we have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf headlining this receiving crew for now. Are you buying the idea that Metcalf will emerge as the most productive Seahawks receiver in 2020?
I'm not, and that's not saying I don't love Metcalf. I like both of these guys. I'll take them both at price, and I'll stack them because of that narrative, let Russ cook. If that happens, holy crap. But Tyler Lockett, before going down with that injury through weeks 1 through 9, was on pace for 304 fantasy points, would have been the number 2 guy in fantasy before that happened. And this was on an offense that was not let Russ cook. It was that low-volume attack. So if we finally get a high-volume attack, that chemistry between those two is probably the best, like 1-2, just where he puts the ball and how Lockett comes down with it, just like holy crap plays. I mean, that it's the best I've ever seen. I could see both these guys lighting it up. So it's not necessarily that I don't like DK. It's more so that I just like Lockett that much more.
It was a trick question. You answered it okay. So well done. But yeah, man, it's just important to remember with the Seahawks. I mean, look, it's these 2 guys on top. And when you look at the types of targets they get, I mean, not every target is created equal. I mean, just historically, players average much more PPR points per red zone and deep ball target. And that's what these guys are living on. Both guys were top 10 in the league in these fantasy friendly targets. I mean, you have your Christian Kirks of the world where they might be, projected for a few more targets than these guys. But man, with that QB play under center and the nature of their routes, I am with you. Don't be afraid to target both of these guys at their mid-20s ADP. All right, in Buffalo, Josh Allen, not the world's most polished QB, but he did enable Smokey Brown to PPR wide receiver 20 heights in 2019. Stefon Diggs, seemingly a new alpha dog. Are you buying Stefon Diggs as someone to target at his, pretty meh ADP?
I'm still not, even though the ADP is not great right now. It's not my guy, and I love Diggs as a player, but Allen as the QB, I just don't love it. I mean, 6 for 50 on throws over 30 yards, only 3 TDs with 3 interceptions. That's a 12% completion rate, and I know Diggs will boost that number, but I just don't buy it. In fact, I'm definitely targeting John Brown well over Stefon Diggs based on their current prices here. Looking at the Fantasy Pros Best Ball ADP, you can get John Brown for around 10 price, 109 overall, wide receiver 42. I think this guy gets gets it done and potentially even outscores Diggs. And you don't have to burn that like 5th, 6th rounder where there's still guys like, we aforementioned Marquise Brown or Devontae Parker, T.Y. Hilton, A.J. Green. I like any of those guys significantly above Stefon Diggs. So give me John Brown, the connection that's already been established, feasting on number 2 corners all year for sure.
This might be like a sneaky discount version of the Detroit Lions where we like Diggs, we like Brown, we like Galladay, we like Marvin, but the ADP difference between the two probably isn't warranted considering the projected targets. I mean, I have been kind of going through with the assumption Diggs is going to be the outright number 1, but it wouldn't be shocking if, that means like 120 targets and Smokey still flirts with triple digits and, with his talent more than capable of smashing that ADP as you suggested. But yeah, it comes down to whether or not Allen can take that step. And to his credit, pretty awful all around as a rookie. They gave him some real weapons. He improved drastically. Now, the big hole, as you mentioned, is that deep ball ability. He was 32nd in deep ball yards per attempt, 32nd in catchable deep ball rate, 28th in QB rating, and 6th in deep ball rate. So even though Josh is not great at throwing the deep ball, like Russell Wilson, 3-pointers, continues to try to do so anyway. We'll see how much Diggs can help that production. He was PFF's, premier deep ball wideout last year. Definitely want Josh Allen in these drafts, but yes, I would say Smokey Brown is the better buy at their present ADP. All right, on the Eagles, we've been getting some Jalen Reagor hype early and often in this training camp. They're apparently using them all around. But, we got some other rookies. Deshaun Jackson is healthy. Zach Ertz and Goddard are going to do their thing. Are you buying Jalen Reagor as a year 1 fantasy relevant asset?
I think speaking of the QB stacks, this might be one of my favorites. When you came on my pod, I was raving about Carson Wentz finally having weapons around him, finally getting those lid lifters so this offense can operate like they did just a few seasons ago when he was on pace for MVP at like 33 touchdowns in only 13 games. The guy was a monster, and I really could see this offense getting back there, and you can stack it so cheap. If you take Wentz in round 9 and then you try both Jackson and Reagor for their round 12, 13, 14 price. To me, I go Jackson first. We've already seen him get it done week 1 last year. He was the number 2 fantasy receiver with 35.4 points, had 10 targets, 8 catches, was moving all over the place. So it wasn't just like a deep ball and they got lucky and hooked up on those. He was in the slot. He was getting run after the catch abilities, and they're already saying the buzz is that he's as fast as ever following his core surgery. So now we know the health is at least in check for now. Obviously the huge risk with them, but I like having both those guys because if Jackson goes down, I do think Reagor could emerge as that true number 1. He certainly has the natural skill set. He dealt with some of the worst QB play in college football that we've ever seen. So now that he gets a deep ball thrower in the like of Wentz, don't be shocked if he blows up too. I'm going Jackson first myself.
Yeah, the kind of like almost hate that Wentz get. I feel like all these Dak versus Wentz, just constant debates, almost like devalues whoever people don't think is the better quarterback. And they're both top 10 QBs, I think, right now, man. And, like you said, 2017 MVP level. And with what? All he had stretching the field was Torrey Smith and, a solid rookie year version of Mac Hollins. 2018, Hollins is hurt. They brought in Mike Wallace. He gets hurt. 2019, D-Jax balls the hell out in week 1, as you mentioned. Hollins doesn't do anything. They just didn't have anyone to stretch the field. So just having Reagor, having, Quez Watkins, Ferguson, these rookies, and a healthy D-Jax, I think it's going to open up the entire offense. Honestly, I've dropped Zach Ertz out of the big 3 tight ends. I think Andrews deserves to be there. But, more and more looking at it, like he's probably going to lead the way in targets. And just with those extra lid lifters, we can see that efficiency boom. So, yeah, I'm with you. One, the cheaper, viable stacks out there with those wide receivers. And, don't be afraid to just take a shot on Ertz and Goddard because there is talent, proven production there. And this, just in general, it's an offense to buy. All right, last one, man. Tampa Bay, the most expensive, I think, offense just in the league pretty much, at least in terms of QB and top 2 wide receivers. So that costs a pretty penny to get either Godwin or Mike Evans. Are you buying or selling Tom Brady being able to enable 2 wide receiver 1s as Jameis did last season?
You know me, I'm certainly a Tom Brady truther from my New England heritage. I think the guy, all reports are he's still slinging the rock. All the players are just shocked at how much velocity is still on his throws. Now, he's not going to be slinging quite like Jameis Winston. Nobody in football ever will sling quite like Jameis Winston. Brady's not going to take those risks. He's not going to give quite as many one-on-one jump ball opportunities. But it doesn't mean Brady can't do that when he's had talent like Evans. The only comparable, in my opinion, and I'm just very high on on Evans as a player, but Randy Moss in terms of the size, the speed, the ability to go up over people. So everyone's assuming it's only Godwin, the slot, the bigger Julian Edelman. I love that narrative. I totally buy Chris Godwin. I think Mike Evans is getting kind of thrown under the rug as an easy fade for analysts. And I just think this guy has great talent. Him and Brady have forging that chemistry since Brady moved down there. And so far in training camp, a lot of reports saying every day there's a wow play between Evans and Brady. So I am buying it. I know I have the bias of a Brady homer, a Brady truther, and I just want it to happen because I still root for the guy even though he's gone. But ultimately, I do buy it. I think Godwin and Evans can both be sustained, maybe not quite as heartily as Jameis did, but with less turnovers. It's just going to be shootout central in that division too. It's going to be back and forth games every single week. So I do buy the narrative. What about you?
It's one of these things where, we got to every single year with these aging veteran quarterbacks just be very quick to jump out. We saw what happened with Peyton Manning, where he went from being 50 touchdown guy to the next season looking like that guy for the first half. All of a sudden, second half of 2014, it's like, where does this arm strength go? And then 2015 starts, and it was like, oh, wow, he's just now a trash quarterback. That did not happen to Brady last season. Now, he did have his worst statistical year since probably 2006, just right before he had that absolute monster blow up. But he was still, one of 14 QBs with a PFF deep ball rating of at least 100. I think it was more of a situation where his guys were all banged up around him. I guess my hesitation is more just, will the volume be there? We got Bruce Arians no longer saying no risk it, no biscuit. He is apparently, happy to not go broke, taking a profit, which is unfortunate, but makes sense when you have someone like TB12. I just think this offense could be a little more ball control than the kind of opening up that we think they could be. While I'm not buying they could be 2 wide receiver ones, I do think you're going to get top 24 value out of both. So, I'm not going out of my way to target these guys, but I also don't think if, you have Evans or Godwin on your team this year, you're going to be bemoaning that fact when things are all said and done. All right, last one. I know I said it before. Truly the last top 10 team we are breaking down, and that is the New Orleans Saints. Drew Brees was excellent last season. I mean, this really shocked me, but if you take away the Rams game where he hurt his thumb early and just average the rest of his fantasy points per game, only Lamar Jackson was the higher fantasy scorer. So they were doing big things. We know Michael Thomas is the 1. We know Alvin Kamara is the 2. Now, new wide receiver there, I'm a little lower on him than most, but maybe I shouldn't be. Are you buying Emmanuel Sanders as a fantasy viable baller in 2020?
I think I am at the price. I mean, you can get him right around the wide receiver 40 range, and he's just such a great real life fit. Now, who knows how much volume we're going to sustain there, but I love Nick Underhill, one of my favorite beat writers, and he talked about how the Saints never really go out and pay up for wide receivers unless it was the perfect type of compliment. And he is. I mean, he works the middle of the field as good as any. He still has the deep speed to get over the top when needed for those shots. He's everything they kind of wish Traquan had been and hasn't developed to. So I think Sanders is a baller. I think within this offense, it's a matter of, are you betting on that pace we saw from Brees you just highlighted? I love that stat. I didn't even know it was that insane. But, man, the guy threw so many touchdowns without even playing, missing those 5 games, that I think they really can sustain this. Now, what does that mean for Jared Cook, who was second behind Mecole Hardman in your playmaker rating there, which is great. The guy gets down the seam so well. He's amazing in the red zone too. So it's either you buy that Brees is going to have a monster year and throw like 40 touchdowns, or it's more of that ball control kind of just pounded offense that we've seen the last couple. To me, I'm leaning more towards that former, the more explosive attack, just because, again, that same narrative with Brady. I don't see how these defenses are going to keep them in, situations that it is pounded out. I think it's going to be pure shootouts all day in those divisions, which is, especially with the lack of time to get the defenses, no crowd noise to fire them up. I think that really is going to end up favoring offenses this year. And I think that's just going to be a points bonanza week in and week out. And I think Sanders can totally be a big part of that. So I love him at his cost right now.
Good point about the crowd noise. Some of these teams with the more extreme home and away splits, such as the Saints, Steelers, could just be balling out more than ever. You give those guys freedom to do whatever the hell they want at the line of scrimmage. It will be interesting to see how much they pump in there, but a topic for another day. Yeah, I've come around a little more to Sanders. Like originally, I wanted, Giants or Texans receivers in that range, and I still probably do more a little bit than Sanders because best outcome is as a number one. He's not going to be there. But Sanders is one of those guys where, you're going to have him in the fantasy lineup at some point, and you're going to feel good about it because he is, any given week, could, rise up and be the guy for that week in one of the league's top 5 offenses. I mean, we know there's going to be touchdowns to go around other than Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. I mean, I know Thomas, he was, flirting with 200 targets last year, but it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world if that dips back down to the 150, 160 range. I mean, it's just hard to have that many targets again. So if that happens, all of a sudden we could feasibly see that number 3 option rise up. So, while the ceiling might not be quite as high, again, he's going in that range where, okay, if you got some wide receivers early, maybe you don't need to take the shot on the big boomer bust guy. You're happier to have Emmanuel Sanders at that point in the draft. So those were our top 10 QBs and, best stacking partners. Hope you all enjoyed that. And then before we get out of here, want to quickly touch on 2 more teams, our late round favorite targets and stacks, especially for those in 2 QB leagues, probably not gonna be able to get 2 of these top 10 guys. Nick, what team and, quarterback and encompassing wide receivers are you looking to get in the later rounds?
To me, it's got to be the Panthers. I keep pounding this division, so we might as well just keep that narrative going. There's an awesome article on Establish the Run about stacking in season long, like we've been talking about, and how every year there's around 4 or so quarterbacks that outperform their ADP by 100. And if you pick that right guy and then also the pieces around him, it gives you an enormous win rate in best ball and all these different things. So I highly recommend checking out that article if you want to consider this strategy, and you should definitely be considering the stacking strategy. And to me, who looks best to outperform their ADP by over 100 points? I love it to be the Panthers. I love this Joe Brady narrative coming from LSU, having coached at the Saints where he was tasked to bring up Teddy Bridgewater. He goes and gets his guy who, I get Bridgewater's not the most exciting QB, but he's just going to be asked to get it out quick. That's what this offense operates on, splitting the field, spreading it, getting speed into space is what Brady calls it. And they've got the premier set of playmakers for speed and space. DJ Moore, incredible after the catch. You don't need me to talk about Christian McCaffrey, but also Curtis Samuel. And I know you're all about that train.
Yeah, buddy.
He's been so misused for so long. He's got the deep speed, and I think Bridgewater has an underrated arm that we just haven't seen him take those shots too much. But more so, Samuel can be a running back-esque when he has that ball in his hands in space. So I think he's going to be the guy I really love to stack with Bridgewater, especially if I get DJ Moore. I'm not afraid to double stack, triple stack this offense. If I get McCaffrey earlier, that's one of those QBs that really ends up working out with the running back stack because McCaffrey's going to catch 5-6 touchdowns himself. So I love, especially if I start with McCaffrey, targeting Bridgewater earlier and then also getting Samuel for a triple stack there. What about you? Any late round breakouts that you love?
Yeah, man, I think the Panthers call is a good one. The defense is just going to be so bad, at least for 2020. The lack of overall continuity in the passing game is a little worrisome just from an efficiency standpoint. But, when you just consider the fact that they're going to have to be passing from behind all the time, right. Yes, I'm with you. I have Teddy as my go-to second late-round QB, and that's just – I had to move up Gardner Minshew and the Jacksonville Jaguars ahead of him. And, do not draft Leonard Fournette, please. Even if there's a fire, do not do it. Just – oh, man, we can get going on that. But we'll talk about the guys you should draft from the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that is Gardner Minshew, the league's number 5 rushing quarterback from last season. I mean, if you're just looking for a YOLO ball, fancy-friendly gunslinger that could, give you what Ryan Fitzpatrick was giving guys last season, I think it's just Gardner Minshew. And this is a guy that is not bad by any stretch. I mean, you look at his rookie season from an efficiency standpoint, he's a top 12 quarterback we've really seen among rookies over the past 10 years in adjusted yards per attempt. So I'm not saying he's going to be a top 12 quarterback this year, but similar to Teddy and the Panthers, he's going to have every opportunity to do so because this is a bad team. But just because they're a bad team doesn't mean it's going to produce bad fantasy assets like we saw on the Miami Dolphins team. So I think like Fitzpatrick and Devontae Parker, Minshew and DJ Chark are just going under the radar as this, duo that is already has demonstrated chemistry in this case. And Chark is one of the cheapest wide receiver ones available. There's not as many stacking partners as, you brought up with the Carolina Panthers. I'm not quite buying the Tyler Eifert resurgence, even though Josh Oliver is now hurt. I do think Laviska Shenault could be a sneaky option. D.D. Westbrook and Chris Conley probably starting on 3 wide receiver sets. But again, when it's so cheap to get this guy who has, some elite looking yards after the catch ability, maybe even getting some running back carries, who knows? He'll rise up my list of favorite players in that case. But do think there is, untapped upside in the backdraft from the Jaguars and, to your point, the Panthers as well. So if you guys, out there, come away, it's getting those late rounds of the draft and you still only have one quarterback you're not feeling good about, do not be afraid to go after Minshew, Teddy, and their band of undervalued receivers. Nick, man.
Absolutely. I mean, and just to toss on your point too, Minshew also has a little bit of sneaky Konami code upside. I think he was like fifth or so, and maybe even third in rushing yards per game and fifth in total rushing yards.
That's right.
So you got that, plus the Jay Gruden offense, which has made, some great passing volume for guys like Kirk Cousins. Andy Dalton was like a top 12 quarterback in all of his seasons under Gruden, except his rookie year. So there is definitely some very real upside to Minshew. I love that call.
That's good to do it for us, man. Thank you again for coming on, Nick. Tell the people where you got coming up and where they can find you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. This is a blast. Always talking ball with you, Hartitz. You can find me at Roto Street Wolf on Twitter. Our site's rotostreetjournal.com, where we breed and feed fantasy wolves, and the podcast, the Fantasy Fullback Dive, where we're paving your path to titles in 2020. Make sure to check that out as well. Thanks so much for having me on again, man. This was a pleasure.
For sure, dude. Always a good time talking ball with you. And that's at Roto Street Wolf for Nick on Twitter. Make sure you shoot him a follow. I'm Ian Hartitz. Thank you all for listening to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. And until next time, take care, everyone.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.